Shimmering ammonite shells buried in the American Midwest are the literal foundation of the region's farmland. A piece from Smithsonian Magazine earlier this week traces how a prehistoric inland sea left behind the minerals that make this soil so productive. It's striking to think that modern harvests rely on a 70-million-year-old graveyard. Yet, the health of that same dirt is under pressure. Writing on July 8th, Esther Ndumi Ngumbi points out that synthetic fertilizers might be choking the microscopic life that keeps crops healthy. Putting these observations together suggests that a farm's success depends on honoring a legacy of life that spans from the prehistoric deep to the invisible world currently living underfoot. Writing just a few days ago, Esther Ndumi Ngumbi, assistant professor, Department of Entomology, African American Studies, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, looks at the hidden life inside a handful of dirt. Notice how she describes the way tiny fungi can trigger a plant to release chemicals that signal for help from pollinators. It suggests that using less synthetic fertilizer might actually give this microscopic workforce the room it needs to keep crops healthy.
Across North America, in places such as Illinois, Iowa, and Texas, farmers are busy growing the crops the world depends on for food, fuel, and fiber. But as their tractors roll across fields, a pressing concern weighs heavily on many farmers: the rising cost of synthetic fertilizers, widely considered essential for crop production. After an expensive spring, with the war in Iran restricting fertilizer and petroleum shipments and raising prices, farmers may be wondering whether they can cut back on fertilizer now and in the future to save money. The answer has a lot to do with a hidden world beneath our feet, where billions of soil-dwelling, beneficial microbes help sustain productive, resilient, and healthy crops and agricultural systems. As a researcher working to uncover the hidden roles of beneficial soil microbes and understand how they improve crop productivity and strengthen plants' resilience against drought and insect pests, I know that cutting down on fertilizers is not a bad thing. In fact, studies suggest that using less fertilizer can boost this natural workforce. Plants do not grow alone. Soils hold a vast and extraordinarily diverse hidden world, teeming with billions of microbes that are essential for sustaining life on Earth and supporting productive and resilient crops. Plants including corn, soybeans, wheat, and tomatoes form intimate and mutually beneficial relationships with these soil-dwelling microbes. Their partnerships help sustain both plant health and the microbial communities. A notable group of beneficial soil microbes is arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi and plant growth-promoting rhizobacteria. These soil-borne microbes can colonize plant roots, living around the roots, on the plant surface, or even inside plant tissue.
In exchange for shelter, nutrients, and carbon-rich sugars that plants produce through photosynthesis, these microbes offer many benefits to plants. They improve plant health and growth, increase yields, and enhance the plant's water and nutrient uptake. They can also boost plants' ability to withstand pathogens, plant-eating insects and diseases, and survive drought and flooding. Research has shown that adding microbes, such as arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, near plant roots can increase plant biomass by nearly 50%. That includes significantly increasing nitrogen absorption by about 2/3 and more than doubling phosphorus uptake, two of the most important nutrients for plant growth. One analysis found that under drought stress, plants with beneficial microbes in or around their roots had nearly 50% higher growth than those without. My own team's research has shown that mycorrhizal fungi can alter chemicals released by plants in ways that are useful for repelling insects while attracting pollinators and insects' natural enemies. These chemicals can also alert plant neighbors of dangers and threats. Soil microbes are also associated with many aspects of soil quality and health. They break down organic matter, cycle nutrients, suppress disease-causing pathogens, and detoxify contaminants. How fertilizers harm the microbe-plant relationship. Synthetic fertilizers have certainly played important roles in food and fiber production and increasing crop yields over the years. However, excessive fertilizer use can quietly harm these beneficial soil microbe communities, in addition to fueling water pollution.
Studies have shown that over-fertilizing can weaken the underground partnerships between plants and microbes that are fundamental to helping plants access nutrients and tolerate stress. Too much nitrogen fertilizer can reduce the diversity and abundance of beneficial soil microbes. Researchers have offered several explanations for why synthetic fertilizers harm soil microbes. First, adding nutrients reduces the amount of carbon that plants send below ground to microbes. This can lead to the loss of some fungal species or favor microbes that contribute little to plant health. Second, adding synthetic fertilizers rich in phosphorus or nitrogen can disrupt the harmonious partnership between plants and microbes. That partnership involves a trade system in which plants provide microbes with sugars from photosynthesis, while the microbes help plants acquire limited nutrients from the soil. When nutrients are abundant, plants may forego the partnership. Ultimately, without an active partnership, fewer microbes will grow. Third, adding synthetic fertilizer makes soil more acidic, which can inhibit arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi and mycelial development. Research has shown that shifts in soil pH to higher acidity can reduce the growth of some microbes, undermining plant-microbe partnerships that have evolved over millions of years. The effects of fertilizers on soils, soil microbial communities, and beneficial microbe groups such as mycorrhizal fungi vary and are at times inconsistent. They can be affected by many factors, including agricultural management and farming practices such as cover cropping or tilling, or the crop species and breeding history.
Fertilizing in economically strategic ways. With fertilizer costs high, I believe farmers, researchers, and others involved in food production should use this moment to rethink how crops and soils are nourished. The answer is not to abandon fertilizers, but to find a balance between fertilizer use and nurturing the living soils and the billions of microbial communities that quietly sustain American and global agriculture. In an era of extreme weather, climate uncertainty, geopolitical tensions, and rising fertilizer costs, keeping soil healthy and nurturing the billions of microbes living there is not only necessary, but also economically strategic.
Esther Ndumi Ngumbi leaves the listener looking at the dirt beneath a tractor's tires as a crowded, living city. The focus is on the immediate, how a farmer in Illinois or Iowa might trade expensive synthetic chemicals for the work of invisible fungi and bacteria. It's a persuasive case for trusting the biology of the present to feed the world. But move from the microscopic to the prehistoric, and the ground starts to look even older. The piece from the Smithsonian shifts the perspective from the microbes currently swimming around corn roots to the massive marine lizards and shimmering ammonites that swam over those same spots 70 million years ago. While Ngumbi points to the natural workforce keeping plants alive today, this next story traces the origin of that fertile ground back to a saltwater sea that once split North America in two. It's a striking pivot. One writer focuses on what's living in the soil right now. The other suggests that the richness of the American prairie is actually a gift from a long-vanished ocean. Notice how the iridescent sheen of a fossilized shell in South Dakota isn't just a museum piece. It's a clue to why the dirt in the Midwest is worth farming in the first place.
An ancient sea once split North America down the middle. The beautiful multicolored ammonite shells from its waters are so perfectly preserved that they still shimmer today. Spectacular marine fossils tell the story of the long-gone western interior seaway and the planet's past aquatic life. South Dakota has no ocean front. The landlocked state is more than 1,000 miles from both the Pacific and the Atlantic, and a rural spot within its borders is regarded as the continental point of inaccessibility from the ocean. And yet, signs of the salty water are still there, enclosed in rocks laid down by a long-vanished seaway that once split North America in two. Back then, more than 70 million years ago, what's now prairie was a warm sea full of marine lizards, knife-toothed sharks, and gorgeous coil-shelled ammonites jetting through the sunny waters. Some of those shining cephalopod shells are now part of an exhibition at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History called From These Lands, which showcases hundreds of specimens and artifacts from across the United States. While fossils such as shark teeth and prehistoric corals can certainly be found along America's coasts, ocean has touched every part of the country at some time or another in the deep past. We find marine fossils in every single state, says Stuart Eady, a paleobiologist and curator at the museum. It's fascinating that you can walk through Minnesota and you can find fossils of starfish. These fossils are remnants of times very different from our own. The South Dakota ammonite shells come from a period when leathery-winged pterosaurs still flew through the air and immense dinosaurs still trod through forests.
In the seas, the now extinct shelled cephalopods proliferated in huge numbers, often serving as food for the large aquatic reptiles of the time. But the ammonites selected for the display did not become a mosasaur's lunch. The shells are so delicately preserved that they continue to shine. They still have this iridescent sheen to them, Eady says, because of the material ammonites use to make their shells. Many ammonite shells were at least partly composed of nacre, he notes, which is the same material that creates oyster pearls. The material, also known as mother of pearl, refracts and bounces light back. The fossilization process allowed the mother of pearl to be better exposed than it would have been during the ammonite's life, Eady explains. The water that the South Dakota ammonites jetted through, the Western Interior Seaway, existed for more than 30 million years. Around 100 million years ago, during the hothouse world of the Cretaceous, sea levels rose to the point that ocean water spilled down the middle of North America, from the Arctic Ocean down to what's now the Gulf Coast. The waters were relatively shallow, no more than 3,000 feet deep compared with the average ocean depth of around 12,000 feet now, but they hosted so much life that paleontologists to this day find gigantic seagoing reptile specimens in Kansas and reef-building clams the size of toilet seats in Utah. And all this life isn't just ancient history. The fossil-filled rocks eroded to the nourishing soils that allowed the Midwest to become so agriculturally important. The seaway eventually vanished as the planet cooled during the end of the Cretaceous and as polar ice formed. Sea levels dropped, and the two split subcontinents finally joined by land in what we now recognize as North America.
Fun fact: ammonite eating habits. Even though some ammonites grew to be about 6 feet across, these shelled sea creatures, the extinct relatives of the modern squid and octopus, fed on small prey, such as plankton. Researchers are constantly unearthing new fossils from the layers of the long-lost Western Interior Seaway. Fort Hays State University paleontologist Amanda Peng notes that countless discoveries of mosasaurs have been made in Kansas and surrounding states. With such a large sample, she says, experts can better study how the anatomies and diets of the various seagoing lizard species that lived in those waters differed. I have a student working on understanding bending strength in mosasaur mandibles, Peng says, and that helps scientists learn more about the larger picture of mosasaur ecology. The continent's rocks don't only hold the remains of this one sea. Thanks to continental drift, changing sea levels, and the nature of fossil-bearing rock formation, America's geologic layers contain the vestiges of various bodies of water from before the time of the Cambrian explosion through the Ice Age. Paleontologists and amateur fossil hunters can find traces of some of the earliest animal life in the deserts of Utah, reefs that witnessed the emergence of some of the first fish in Ohio, and the teeth of 20-million-year-old sharks in South Carolina. Some states rest entirely on what's left of past oceans. There is evidence of the ancient environment all around us in northeast Ohio, says Cleveland Museum of Natural History paleontologist Caitlin Colery. The bedrock beneath Ohio is made up of various rocks that formed during the time when plants were only just beginning to grow on land, and our ancestors had yet to live on it.
Little brachiopods, clam-like organisms that have been on Earth for more than 500 million years, and the stems of feathery starfish relatives called crinoids can be found there. When you start to pay attention to these rocks that you pass by every day, you can sometimes see fossils or evidence of the ancient body of water itself, like ripple marks, Colery says. Classic finds from the area include amazing fossils of the shark-like fish Cladosolaki, with some detailed enough to have preserved gut contents.
And the construction of Highway I-71 during the 1960s led to massive excavations of fossils that are still being prepared and studied by researchers for new insights into why the area's sharks stayed in such great shape and what was happening in the seas just before a major shakeup. These rocks preserve an ecosystem right before the mass extinctions at the end of the Devonian period 358 million years ago, so they are a really important part of the story of how things changed on Earth after that, Kaleri says. Coastal states boast fossils in the National Museum of Natural History display too. One of the featured objects is Ecphora gardnerae, the state fossil of Maryland. The shells, the mobile homes of prehistoric snails, are more than 20 million years old and come from a time when the immense prehistoric shark Otodus megalodon was swimming through the world's oceans. While also carnivorous, Ecphora was not quite so imposing as a 50-foot-long shark, but the lovely shell of the mollusk still has an important connection to American history, as well as prehistory. It's a beautiful specimen, named after a prominent paleontologist from Maryland, Julia Gardner, Edie says, and we're glad to tell the story here in this exhibit. Gardner wrote the book on southern marine invertebrate paleontology, he says. What might seem like an unassuming snail speaks volumes of the history of science and the people who've studied these creatures. After all, fossils fascinate many more people than the professional paleontologists who study them. Peng notes that the Western Interior Seaway has had a deep effect on the local culture in Kansas and the broader Midwest, something she regularly encounters at the Sternberg Museum of Natural History. Every visitor I've talked to at the museum about the Seaway or about the fact Kansas used to be underwater has been completely knowledgeable about this, Peng says, adding that she is sometimes called by members of the public with questions about fossils they've found. These people come from all walks of life. They tell me about how they or their family love fossil hunting, and they found all sorts of fossils on their land or in a road cut or in a field. Marine fossils are invitations to connect our present moment to the planet's past. Selecting fossils to display in From These Lands led Edie to think about the relationships between times and places that at first might seem to have little to do with each other. In the charge to find stories from places like Rhode Island and Washington State, far from where I grew up, I learned a lot, Edie says. I hope our visitors have a similar experience. I hope they see themselves in the show. The items on view in the exhibition are like snapshots from an evolutionary epic that has involved mass extinctions, climate changes, the rearranging of continents, and animal adaptations like shells, jaws, and teeth. Together, they convey a lesson on life's resilience. There are all kinds of impending stressors today, and we know from past events that they can be pretty bad. They can knock biodiversity down quite a bit, Edie says. What researchers like him are taking an interest in now is the fossil record showing how life bounces back from disaster. It will. It has, time and time again, he says. The proof is in the petrified seashells and bones buried by ocean sand so long ago.
The dust kicked up by a tractor in Iowa was once the floor of a prehistoric ocean filled with shells and salt. Today, that same ground houses billions of microscopic creatures working to keep the corn green. A field looks like a simple place to grow food, yet it binds together ancient fossils and modern microbes. What lingers is the image of the ground as a finite inheritance. If that's true, how does one decide what to take and what to leave for the next 1,000 years?